Yeah,
Wait. Hello, Sudeep.
yes.
Welcome.
Thank
This is
you.
the eighth session of my project, and I'm very glad that you accept to talk with me and with us tonight. Welcome again.
Thank you. My pleasure.
I will pass the presentation because your presentation is on our site on Museum of Romanian Literature, and um, it's also on Facebook. Um, for now, I want to ask you Um, a few questions and before these questions, I want to read us something. But for now, I want to know uh, um, about your debut. I know that your debut is far away chronologically, but I want you to tell us more about your start in poetry and in editorial business.
So yes, my first book came out a long, long time ago, 35 years ago, actually. I
35,
don't even know, 35 years ago. I don't know how old you are.
45.
You're 45?
Yes,
Okay, so you were 10 years old when I
yes.
published my
I
book.
was 10 years old.
Yes. So yeah, it's a long time ago. That was 1990. The book was called The Lunar Visitations. It came out in New York. What was I? What I was studying there, I think. Or I just started working. Um, and the way it happened was it was a winner of a poetry competition. There's all these competitions in America and the UK where you send your manuscript, unpublished manuscript, and the Lunar Visitations was the winner of that particular competition, and the prize was some money and the publication of the book. So that's how it all started. Yeah, in 1990.
In 1990. Um, I think these facts are also in Romania today,
Mm.
in Romanian poetry, in our cultural society. Yes, and what do you think about your debut now? It's shameful. It's what's the state between you
The
and
Debbie,
your
the Debbie remains the same. I was only, well, when the book was accepted, I was only 23 years old, and the book came out when I was 24. So I was a young person, at the time. So the poems there reflect my time when I was that age. And of course, there's a nice story I can tell you. When so anyway, what happened was, I got a phone call saying, "Can I speak to Sudeep Sen in an American accent?" And of course, they mispronounced my name. So I initially said wrong number, and they said no, the Lunar Visitations. So I said yes. And they said, you won the prize. And of course, when you're just 20, early 20s, you're confident and cocky. And so acted very cool and said, oh, well, then thank you. And that was that. And I kept the phone down. And then I was screaming in the apartment, running around. I said, I can't believe it. But then after about a week of celebration, I mean, my prize money finished very quickly because my friends wanted a treat, and of course, they don't last very long. Um, and then I got cold feet because by then I had written my second and third books. None of it was published, but I had written it by then. And the second and third books were, of course, much better than the first book, according to me, more mature. So I wrote to my professor, saying that, first the dream was to have a book. When you're young, you're so misguided. Not
Yes.
misguided. That's part of being young. You want a book published by a good place, and you want to see the cover, you want to see the book in a bookshop, the spine with your name on it, all the wrong things. SEN would be next to other great poets with S, and in a New York bookshop. So, all that sort of thing. And I wrote to my professor saying that, it's all very well, but I don't think I want this book to be out because it's too immature. And he wrote back this beautiful postcard. These are days before mobile phone, before these were days of faxes. People sent faxes and people actually wrote postcards and letters. So he sent me a beautiful postcard saying that, Sudeep, this is your first child. Father it. If you don't father it, no one else will.
Yes.
And that was a lovely thing. So, so when I look back, these are poems of that time. They are also there in Fractals, the book you have also. I gave you two books. One was the Romanian translation, and I gave you Fractals, which you may have lost by now because it's a fat book.
Do you
And
sometimes read the first book, your first book?
yeah, so I chose some poems from the very first book. Remembering Hiroshima Tonight appeared in the first book just to give your audience a taste of how things were. Of course, I think Remembering Hiroshima was one of the better poems in that book, so that's why I chose it. But yeah, it was the poems of that time, and of course, I've grown. The critics have a really hard time with me because every book I write is so different from the book before that. So they can't pigeonhole me that, his poetry is like this or that. So academics and critics find it very hard to say that, we can slot him in this particular movement or that particular movement. Um, my answer to that is, if I'm going to repeat myself in my new book, what's the point of writing it? Plus, I get bored very quickly, so I have to challenge myself. So, so every time there is a new book, it's completely new, nothing like something that I've written before. Of course, in a given longer phase of, say, 5 years or 10 years, you will find some similarity because, you are also growing and you don't change overnight.
Yes,
So,
yes.
yes, I mean, so the debut book is a very dear book to me. It's my first child.
Tell me, please, that professor was your mentor?
Well, he was my mentor at the time. Yes, he was. That was the first creative writing poetry workshop I'd ever taken in America. He was a professor at the university I was studying. And of course, I took that course up as a joke because in India, when you grow up, creative writing is not taken seriously. It's not taught. Even now, very few places teach creative writing. So if you're a writer, you're self-taught. So I had that mentality, oh, well, how can anybody teach you how to write poetry? But I took that class. I said, I'm writing poetry anyway, so I'm going to get 4 credits for writing poetry. It's easier to take poetry writing than physics. you know?
Yes.
So, but I have to say I learned a lot, because he was a very good teacher, very good mentor, and there was a whole process which and many windows opened up, which I'm glad. But he was a particularly good teacher, so I was very lucky. So
Uh,
yes, he
what
was he was a mentor.
what is his name?
He's no more right now. His name is Anthony Abbott, Professor Anthony Abbott. He's a
Anthony.
poet. He's a poet, also an American poet.
I
He
think you
published.
are citing him on a poem. Yes?
Possibly, yeah. Maybe one of the poems are dedicated to him. Yes. Or
Yes.
in fact, my first book was partly dedicated to him. It was dedicated to him and my parents.
Tell me, Sudeep, and this is the last question about your debut. How many books have you sold from the first book?
Oh, it sold out a long time ago. The
Yes.
first the first book, the first edition got sold out, and then the second edition came out, the third edition came out. Then other editions of the book came out. I moved back to India then. Then an Indian publisher printed that book from a very good publishing house in India. So that sold out as well. So yeah, there aren't too many copies left. I have two copies left. One is my reading copy, which is all battered, and one is on my shelf. So yeah, there are two copies left, but you'll find them in libraries and so on. So yeah. But that was a long time ago. You're talking about 1990, 91, 92.
But I'm glad that I've managed to send you back there.
Oh, I'm always there. I never grow up. One of the ways to keep fresh is to maintain the child in you. And people often forget the child in an adult. And I feel for creative artists, it's very important to maintain the child in me. And of course, yes, thank you for taking me back down memory lane, because it is a long time ago. Yes, fond memories.
Sudeep, from the editorialist point of view, what place does poetry occupy in the Indian book market now, in our days?
So when we talk about India, it's a complicated answer to give you, because we have 26 official languages and over 30,000 dialects. So literature is being produced in all these languages. So in many of the other languages, not English, many of the other languages, poetry is a very vibrant space. People love poetry. And so there's a lot of readership. There's a lot of interest in poetry. However, like everywhere in the world, it's very difficult to publish poetry with a big publishing house, because most publishing houses don't want to touch poetry because they say it doesn't sell. It's not true. Poetry books do sell. So it's a very vibrant scene. So English is just one of the many languages that are spoken in India and written here. I also said to you before, when we first met in Timishwara, that English is one of my Indian languages, because I learned English from my parents and grandparents who are Indians. So it's got nothing to do with.
I want to ask you something about this a little later.
Yes.
About your reformation, but I want to start with you the first session of reading.
Yeah.
You will read in English, and I will read the translation by Antuța Genescu in Romanian. Yes?
Sure. So the first poem I'll read is called Disembodied. Yeah.
Yes.
Do I have it in front of you? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So Disembodied is a poem that comes, it is in my newest book called Anthropocene. Anthropocene is a book on climate change, contagion, and consolation. So it was all written during that time. And in fact, Disembodied was written and it was not published when the Romanian book came out. So at the time, there were lots of unpublished poems that came out in Driftwood. What was the Romanian book called? El Plutitor. Lem Plutitor.
Lem Plutitor, Driftwood.
Driftwood, yes.
Driftwood, Lem Plutitor, yes.
Yes. So this is a poem that was written during the pandemic. And of course, it's set in my home city of New Delhi, which is where I'm speaking from right now. And it's a very, very polluted city, sadly. The pollution levels are so high that, in fact, I'm asthmatic. So I suffer a lot in the city. And otherwise, it's a beautiful city. I love my city. But in the last 10 years, I'm not able to live here, or I'm always not well. So it talks about climate and pollution at some level, and it also, of course, talks about ecology. Disembodied. My body carved from abandoned bricks of a ruined temple, from minaret shards of an old mosque, from slate remnants of a medieval church apse, from soil tilled by my ancestors. My bones don't fit together correctly as they should. The searing ultraviolet light from aurora borealis patches and edge corrects my orientation. Magnetic pulses prove potent. My flesh sculpted from the fruits of the tropics, blood from coconut water, skin moist colored by, I'll start this line again. My flesh sculpted from the fruits of the tropics, blood from coconut water, skin colored by brown bark of Indian teak. My lungs fueled by Delhi's insidious toxic air, echo asthmatic sounds, a new vinyl dub remix. Our universe, where radiation germinates from human follies, where contamination persists from mistrust, where pleasures of sex are merely a sport, where everything is ambition, everything is desire, everything is nothing, nothing, and everything. White light everywhere, but no one can recognize its hue. No one knows that there is color in it, all possible colors. Body worshipped not for its blessing, but its contours. Artificial shape shaped by Nautilus, skin moistened by L'Oreal and not by season's first rains, skeleton strength not shaped by earthquakes or slow molded by fearless forest fires. Ice caps are rapidly melting, too fast to arrest glacial slide. In the near future, there will be no water left or too much water that is undrinkable, excess water that will drown us all. Disembodied floats, afloat like Noah's Ark. No GPS, no pole star navigation, no fossil fuel to burn away, just maps with empty grids and names of places that might exist. Already, there is too much traffic on the road. Unpeopled hollow metal shells without brakes swerve about, directionless, looking for an elusive compass. Thank you.
Dematerializat. Partea 1. Trupul meu cioplit din cărămizi abandonate într-un templu ruinat, din cioburi de minaret al unei vechi moschei, din resturi de ardezie de la absida unei biserici medievale, din pământ lucrat de strămoșii mei. Oasele mele nu se potrivesc așa cum ar trebui. Ultravioletele arzătoarele aurorei boreale îmi refac și îmi marchează, corectează orientarea. Impulsurile magnetice se dovedesc puternice. Carnea mea sculptată în fructe de tropice, sângele din apa nucii de cocos, pielea colorată cu scoarță maronie de tec indian. Plămânii mei alimentați cu aer toxic insidios din Delhi, reflectă zgomote astmatice, un nou remix pe vinil. Universul nostru, unde radiațiile germinează din folia umană, unde contaminarea persistă prin neîncredere, unde plăcerea sexuală e doar un sport, unde totul e ambiție, totul e dorință, totul e nimic, nimic și tot. Partea a doua a poemului. Lumina albă pretutindeni, dar nimeni nu-i cunoaște nuanța, nimeni nu știe că există culoare în ea, toate culorile posibile. Trup adorat, nu pentru binecuvântarea, ci pentru conturul lui, formă artificială modelată de Nautilus. Piele înmuiată de L'Oreal și nu de primele ploi de primăvară, forța scheletului năclăit în cutremure sau lent modelat de focuri care ard flămând pădurile. Calote glaciare se topesc rapid, prea repede pentru a opri alunecarea ghețurilor. În viitorul apropiat nu va mai fi apă, sau nu va mai fi prea multă apă potabilă, apă în exces care ne va înneca pe toți. Frânturi dematerializate plutesc ca arca lui Noe, fără GPS, fără orientare după steaua polară, fără combustibil fosil, doar hărți cu caroiajul gol și nume de focuri, de locuri care ar putea exista. Deja e trafic greu pe șosele. Carapace de metal fără oameni, fără frâne, virează fără direcție, căutând o busolă înșelătoare. I will please read the next poem.
Okay. The next poem is called Kargil. And Kargil was written a while ago. This was when the big war with Pakistan, our neighbor, happened. Of course, there's been subsequently a few small wars, but this was a really big war. And it's up in the border area of India and Pakistan in the Himalayan foothills. And 10 years after the Kargil War, my son and I did this wonderful road trip. We went from Delhi all the way to Srinagar, across to Leh, then Kulu Manali and back. So round trip with camping and whitewater rafting and all sorts of things. Kargil, the place, was not on my route. But my son was young then, and he was at an age where he was playing with plastic guns and, bullets. And so he said, Baba, we must go to Kargil because we'll find some bullets and shells and everything. Of course, you don't say no to your child. So I took him, we went. And he was very disappointed because it was 10 years after the war. So it's a, normal, dusty outpost of a town, nothing very exciting there. And he was feeling bad that he had dragged me there. But I'm grateful that he took me there because otherwise this poem wouldn't have happened. It opens with an epigraph from Derek Walcott's book-length poem. Is that in the Romanian translation? Derek Walcott.
I don't think so.
Does it start with 10 years on?
Yes, it is. It is translated.
The Derek Walcott quote is translated?
Yes, the paragraph on the first part of the poem. Yes. A motto.
So the poem is called Kargil, and it has an epigraph from Derek Walcott's a book-length poem called The Teopolo's Hound. And I quote, "Our street of smoke and fences, gutters gorged with weed and reeking, scorching iron grooves of rusted galvanize, a dialect forged from burning asphalt, and a sky that moves with thunderhead cumuli, grumbling with rain." 10 years on, I came searching for war signs of the past, expecting remnants, magazine debris, unexploded shells, shrapnels that mark bomb wounds. I came looking for ghosts, people past, skeletons jarred, abandoned brick, wood, cement that once housed them. I could only find whispers among the clamor of a small town outpost in full throttle, everyday chores sketching outward signs of normalcy and life. In that bustle, I spot war lines of a decade ago, though the storylines are kept buried, wrapped in old newsprint. There's order amid uneasiness. The muezzins cry, the monks chant, baritones merging in their separateness. At the bus station, black coughs of exhaust smoke screen everything. The roads meet, and after the crossroad ritual, diverge, skating along the undotted lines of control. A porous garland with cracked beads adorns Tiger Hill. Beyond the mountains are dark memories, and beyond them, no one knows. And beyond them, no one wants to know. Even the flight of birds that wing over their crests don't know which feathers to down. Chameleon-like, they fly, tracing perfect parabolas. I look up and calculate their exact arc and find instead a flawed theorem. Thank you.
Cum a zis și Sudeep, acest poem Cargill are un moto din Derek Walcott, din poemul Tiepolos Hound, cartea întâi, și începe așa: strada noastră de fum și garduri, rigole debordând de buruieni și duhoare, caneluri de fier încinse, de galvanizare ruginită, un dialect forjat din asfalt fierbinte și un cer care se mișcă, cu nori burduhănoși, huruind a ploaie. Am închis citatul. Peste 10 ani am căutat semne de război trecute, așteptându-mă la rămășițe, resturi de magazie, obuze neexplodate, șrapnele care marchează răni lăsate de bombe. Am căutat fantome, oameni trecuți, schelete carbonizate, abandonate, cărămida, lemnul, cimentul care le-au adăpostit cândva. Am găsit doar șoapte, șoapte printre zgomotele unui mic avampost din oraș în plină viteză. Sarcini zilnice, conturând semne exterioare de normalitate și viață. În agitația aceea aflu povești de război de un deceniu, deși scenariile sunt îngropate, învelite în ziare vechi. Există ordine în neliniște, țipătul muezinului, psalmul călugărului, baritoni uniți în diferența lor. În stația de autobuz, jeturi negre de gaze acoperă totul. Drumurile se întâlnesc și după ritualul intersectării se despart, patinând pe liniile punctate de control. O ghirlandă poroasă din mărgele crăpate împodobește dealul Tigrului. Dincolo de munți zac amintiri întunecate, iar dincolo de ele nimeni nu știe, iar dincolo de ele nimeni nu vrea să știe. Nici păsările care zboară deasupra crestelor nu știu ce pene să-și scuture. Ca niște cameleoni zboară, trasând parabole perfecte. Ridic ochii și calculez arcul lor exact, găsesc în schimb o teoremă incorrectă. Sudeep, please read the next poem. And the last one in this session. Your microphone. Microphone.
Yes. I had turned it off because I was warming some tea next to me. I didn't want the war signs of the past bubbling into your poem, but that might have been a good sound effect. I have to thank, before I read the poems, Antuza Genescu, who has translated these poems with a lot of love and care. I don't understand Romanian, but I'm sure they're coming across well. And I've got good feedback when the book came out. You remember the time it was done? It was done during the Lit Fest.
Yes, yes.
Lit Fest.
In
Those,
2018, yes?
oh, already 6 years ago. Wow. Okay, time flies. 2018, yeah, it was specially done for the Lit Fest. And initially, of course, there was a stack of poems that were given to her by Tudor Cretu. And then we realized it was quite a lot of poems, and we added a few more because we realized it was enough for a book. And we were glad that, that could come out before the festival. And it was a lovely souvenir to have. So thank you, Antusa. If you're watching, Ola from Delhi, and to your husband. I remember the lovely times in your house and eating in the garden and the barbecues and everything else. Let me read two poems because these two poems are linked in this session. The first one is called Banyan.
Yes.
And the second one is called Winter. Banyan is a tree in India, which is, this vast tree. And there are these tertiary roots which come down and meet the ground. And over time, they also look like branches, tertiary branches. And when the tree becomes very old, it becomes almost like a cave, a nest. So as children, I remember we used to play the great place for playing hide and seek, and it's a beautiful tree. But of course, it's about many other things, as poems tend to be. The tree is just an artifice. Banyan. As winter secrets melt with the purple sun, what is revealed is electric. Notes tune unknown scales, syntax alters tongues, terracotta melts white, banyan ribbons into armatures as branch roots twist, meeting soil in a circle. Circuits glazed under cloth carry alphabets for a calligrapher's nib, italicized in invisible ink. Letters never posted, cartographer's map uncharted. As phrases fold, so do veils.
Read Winter too, because they are very tight, linked.
They're linked and they're not linked. It's like the tradition of, twinned poems, like Milton's La Allegro and El Penseroso. The poems were often written as sort of diptych. Winter. Couched on crimson cushions, pink bleeds gold, and red spills into one's heart. Broad leather keeps time, calibrating different hours in different zones, unaware of the grammar that makes sense. Only random woofs and snores of two distant dogs on a very cold night clears fog that is unresolved. New plants wait for new heat to grow, to mature. An old cane recliner contains poetry for peace, woven text keeping comfort in place. But it is this impatience of want that keeps equations unsolved. Heavy, translucent, vaporous, split red by mother tongues. Winter's breath is pink. Thank you.
Thank you too. Să încep cu Banyan. Când tainele iernii se topesc în soarele de purpură, ceea ce se dezvăluie este electric. Note înlănțuite, game necunoscute, sintaxa modifică limbile, teracota topește panglicile albe ale banianului în armături, rădăcinile crengi se împletesc, întâlnind solul într-un cerc. Circuitele șlefuite sub pânză poartă alfabete pentru penița unui caligraf scrise cursiv cu cerneală invizibilă, scrisori niciodată trimise, harta cartografului necartografiată, cum se pliază vorbele, tot așa și voalurile. Iarna. Ghemuit pe penesta cojii, rozul sângerează auriu, iar roșul se revarsă în inimă. Pielea ține socoteala timpului, calibrând ore diferite în zone diferite, necunoscând gramatica purtătoare de sens. Lătratul și mărâitul întâmplător a doi câini îndepărtați, într-o noapte foarte rece, alungă ceața necotărâtă. Roadele așteaptă căldura nouă, să crească, să se coacă. Un vechi scaun comod din trestie, poezie pentru pace, textul împletit menține confortul, dar nerăbdarea dorinței e cea care lasă ecuațiile nerezolvate. Grea, translucidă, vaporoasă, în roșu tăiată de lămbile materne, respirația iernii e roz.
Bravo.
Bravo to you. I'm only a reader.
Good reader. I can see that you're a poet.
Thank you. Sudeep, tell us the most important characteristic of the Indian literary life. We want to know if there are many differences between it and the European life.
Oh, completely different. Two different
Completely?
planets.
Yes?
Yes. Two different planets. Yes. Well, India is one of the origins of civilizations. India is part of that. The Indus Valley civilization in India and Southeast Asia, the Aztecs and the Mayans. In the Middle East, the Tigris and the Euphrates River, Iran and Iraq. These cultures go back. These were the birth of cultures, the Chinese culture and so on. So when you're talking about the Western world, it's a little baby next to these.
It's
So
recent.
yes, it's recent. So what are we talking about? So the literatures and everything goes back so far. So we need to compare like with like. So if you're talking about just contemporary literature in India with contemporary Western literature, yes, in the city literatures that are produced from the cities, there will be similarities because urban literature has many common themes in all our urban spaces. But the literatures that are not based in the Indian cities, that are based in Indian mythology, based in the folklore of this country, of course, are unique to just this place. And don't forget, as I mentioned earlier, that the literatures are being produced in 30 different languages, so many different tongues, so many beautiful ways of expressing the same thing. So, in fact, what is finally translated into English is a very small percentage of what you see from India. Of course, there's also people who write in English, which is an Indian language, as far as I'm concerned. So, but that's easy for it to travel because it's almost become a lingua franca of the world. So, but yeah, I mean, the landscape, the ethos, there is no similarity. No, unless we are comparing very urban literature with urban literature. And even then, the Indian literature will be very different.
You've told us already that the English language is your native one for you. Can you explain in few more details? You are thinking in English or in Indian? You
So
are
I have I
sensing.
have
In
I
what
have three.
language do you concept your poems? What is your
Depends on my mood, where I am at, what the sky is looking like. I have three mother tongues: Bengali, Hindi, and English. All three are Indian mother tongues as far as I'm concerned, because I learned them when I was a child. I learned all these languages at the same time. I also know three or four other Indian languages. So, I grew up in a very polyphonic, polylingual space. And it is very normal in India. It's very normal in ancient cultures for people to know a lot of languages. It's not, it's very like Romania. You know so many languages of the neighboring countries, for instance. So it's very similar in that way. And we don't even think about it. Just because of the imperial history, English was shown to be a foreign language. Maybe it was a foreign language when my grandparents were growing up. Yes, it was introduced by them. But I'm so many generations after that. For me, English is Indians. I've learned it from parents who are brown, from grandparents who are brown, who speak so many languages, and our English is also very specific. There is a version of English which is Indian English, just like American English, Caribbean English, African English, Australian English. There are variations even within English, and of course you have the English, the Queen's English. But even in England, there's so many variations: the north and the south, and so it's in a sense a beautiful way, because I never thought of English as a foreign language, and it's only when I travel abroad and I'm talking to people from not India, say like yourself, people ask me this question: so how come you're thinking, writing in a foreign language? And is it a foreign language? Is it not a foreign language? It's very mysterious. Had you been speaking to me in Bengali or English or Hindi, I would have spoken in that happily. But there's a problem. I can't speak Romanian and you can't speak Bengali. So we have to resort to English. And English happens to be one of my mother tongues. So that's the way we grew up. And as I said, it's mood dependent. So often in a sentence in the house, we would use three languages in the same sentence, depending on, so the daily vernacular language in every city becomes very different, because the local languages are there, your mother tongue is there, the English is there, the Hindi is there. It's all mixed up depending on your mood, because sometimes, to curse a person, English is not a very good language. You curse in another language. If you're watching sport, then you use some English because so it's very wonderful in a way. It's very
terminology?
colorful, because the sentence might have three different languages. So it's normal for us. So yes, it's completely an Indian language. Right now, I'm restricting myself to only English, which is only 1/3 of my mother tongue.
Sudeep, let's read something. Another
Some
three
more poems?
poems. Another three poems.
Yes, but before that, tell me, how do my English poems come across in Romanian? I mean, that will be an interesting thing for me to know. And how does the cadence and the stories and the narrative and the poetics come across?
Your book is bilingual.
I know, but I'm talking about just the Romanian translations.
Um, I don't understand.
How does it come across? If someone that didn't have access to the English poems and only heard you,
I
how?
will post. I will post them in comments on Facebook.
Ah, okay.
Yes, in English and
Well,
in
what is
Romanian.
what is your opinion? Does it come across well in Romanian?
Uh, I have you as my companion. It's not enough?
No, what I meant is the poem itself, when you see it only in Romanian.
It's
Um,
are very good. The poems are very good.
mm,
Are in force.
yeah, yeah. So Antuza has done a
But
lot of
but
work,
the
and
differences between your age of creation is also seen.
ah.
Yes, the book is an anthology.
Yes, it's a selection
It,
from
it's an
my,
assumed thing.
yes, yes,
Yes.
that's right. Yeah. Mm. So, okay, so since we're talking, we are speaking, let's talk about language and grammar.
Yes.
Um, and you see, the thing is, most of my poems tend to be quite serious, even though informally I can be very relaxed and informal and I can crack jokes. But sometimes, whenever it comes to writing poetry, it's always serious. So I find writing funny poems very difficult. But I've tried once or twice. And this particular poem called Grammar is partly also is to bring out a certain kind of humor, but it's also to do with the way academia works, academics work, and critics work. Because as a creative writer, as a poet, as a fiction writer, we come from a very different place, and the academics come from a different place. And sometimes there's very little overlap, because they use these big jargon and word and theory. Not that I have any problem with it, because that's an interesting part of language. So this is a poem called Grammar. And again, it has a little epigraph from an Australian poet called Melinda Bobbis, from a poem called First Night. And I quote, "She has no English, her lips round in a moan, calligraphy of veins. My syntax tightly wrought. I struggle to let go of its formality, of my wishbone desiring juice, its deep marrow, muscle, and skin. This sentence finally pronounced. I'm greedy for long drawn out vowels, for consonants that desire lust, tissue, gray cells. I'm hungry for love, for pleasure, for flight, for a story essaying endlessly in words. A comma decides to preposition a full stop. Ellipsis pause to reflect. A phrase decides not to reveal her thoughts after all. Ellipses and semicolons are strange bedfellows. Calligraphy of veins and words require ink, the ink of breath, of blood, corpuscles speeding faster than the loop of serifs, the unresolved story of our lives in a fast train without terminals. I long only for italicized ellipses. My English is the other. The other is really English. She has no English. Her lips round in a moan, oval, rich, nuanced, grammar drenched, etched letters of glass. Thank you.
Gramatică. Citatul din Melinda Bobbis, poemul First Night, este următorul. Nu știe engleză. Buzele îi se rotunjesc într-un geamăt, caligrafia venelor. Sintaxa mea, riguros lucrată, mă lupt să renunț la formalismul ei, la iadeșul meu, sucul doritor, măduva ascunsă, mușchiul și pielea ei. Sentința pronunțată în cele din urmă. Sunt lacom de vocale alungite, de consoane care jinduiesc după senzual, țesut, materie cenușie. Mi-e foame de iubire, de plăcere, de zbor, de o poveste care încearcă la nesfârșit cuvinte. O virgulă decide să preopună un punct, elipsele se opresc să reflecteze. O sintagmă decide să nu-și dezvăluie gândurile la urma urmei. Elipsele și punctul și virgula sunt bizari parteneri de pat. Caligrafia venelor și puncte și cuvintele vor cerneală. Cerneala respirației, a sângelui, corpusculi mai rapizi decât buclele serifelor. Povestea neîncheiată a vieților noastre într-un tren rapid fără terminale. Tânjesc numai după elipse scrise cursiv, engleza mea este cealaltă este engleza adevărată, ea nu știe engleză, buzele îi se rotunjesc într-un geamăt, ovale, pline, nuanțate, înnecate în gramatică, litere de sticlă scrijelite.
Sounded good. So, partly it answers some of the questions you were asking earlier. Whose English is it anyway? The whole thing about who owns English? Perhaps it was owned by the English once upon a time.
Once upon a time. The English now is ours.
The English now is ours. The English we speak in different parts of the world is our English. So she has no English. It's the othering of things.
Let's read another poem.
This one is called Jacket on a Chair. A type of poetry that I tend to write also is what is called ekphrastic poetry. Ekphrastic poetry is poetry that responds to art, fine arts in particular, but I respond to not just fine art, but to music, to theater, to film. So there's a whole series of poems that I've written in this particular way. And this particular poem, Jacket on a Chair, draws inspiration from Cézanne, the painter. And the name of the painting is also called Jacket on a Chair. It's dated between 1890 to 92. Jacket on a Chair. You carelessly tossed the jacket on a chair. The assembly of cloth collapsed in slow motion into a heap of cotton. Cotton freshly picked from the fields, like flesh without a spine. The chair's wooden frame provided a brief skeleton, but it wasn't enough to renew the coat's shape, the body's prior strength, or the muscle to hold its own. When one peels off one's outer skin, it is difficult to hide the true nature of blood. Wood, wool, stitches, and joints, an epitaph of a God-pledged shuffle, and the history of my dark faith. Thank you.
Jachetă pe scaun. Așa cum a zis și Sudeep puțin mai înainte, este un poem inspirat de tabloul lui Cézanne, care se numește Jachetă pe scaun, o lucrare executată în grafit și acuarelă pe hârtie între 1890 și 1892. Poemul Jachetă pe scaun sună în felul următor. Ți-ai aruncat neglijent jacheta pe scaun. Stofa adunată, căzută cu încetinitorul într-o grămadă de bumbac proaspăt cules de pe câmp, precum carnea fără șira spinării. Cadrul de lemn al scaunului a susținut-o o vreme, dar nu a fost destul ca să-i redea forma, forța dinaintea corpului sau mușchii ca să reziste singură. Când îți dai jos pielea exterioară, e dificil să ascunzi adevărata natură a sângelui. Lemn, lână, cusături și îmbinări. Un epitaf al unui jucător amestecând cărțile și istoria credinței mele întunecate. And another poem for the second round of reading. Please, Sudeep.
Okay, so this is a poem called Indian dessert.
Indian dessert, not Indian desert. Yes?
Indian dessert, like the
Dessert.
sweet. Yeah, not desert as in the
Yes.
sand, but dessert as the sweet, something to eat. This particular poem is also what I would call a recipe poem. So if you follow the poem very carefully, you can make a very good Indian dessert. This particular recipe is for gajar ka halwa, which is carrot halwa. So you have carrot and milk and almonds and so on.
It's a
This
very
is
delicious poem
very delicious
from
poem.
many points of view.
Indeed, indeed. You have to taste it. The only way to enjoy it is to taste it from many points of view.
Yes, yes.
It's, of course, part of a series of erotic poems I wrote called Lines of Desire, 16 Movements on Erotica. And this is one of the 16 poems I wrote. And the reason I wrote it to start with, I think, was, I was really frustrated with this whole idea that, we come from the land where Kama Sutra was written. These ancient temples have these beautiful erotic sculptures. And it's very public, this whole aspect of sexuality. Over time, because of the Western influences and the Christian influence and so on and so forth, the society became much more closed. So I felt that it's really strange that here we are, more educated, so to speak, more informed, so to speak, we don't know. And we are getting closer and closer. Why is it that we can't celebrate erotica and sexuality? Erotic writing, of course, is very difficult because you have to skate on that fine thin line. If you undercook it, it becomes like a soppy love poem, which one would write when you're in high school or college. If you overcook it, then it can enter the P space, the P space. So it's a very, very difficult space to write. But hey, it's not about erotica at all. It's about making gajar ka halwa. Enjoy. Indian dessert. Clumps of wet smoke simmer in the pan and slowly lift to caress the outline of your breasts as you cook, stirring spices in carrot, milk, and cream. Ingredients that conjure recipes of hunger and passion. As you melt sugar and butter and gently stroke flakes of grated almond shavings, more clumps of perfume smoke permeate through the silk of your shirt, now transparent in heat, painting the outer circle of the nipples to a hardened edge, tasting the sweet skin, the surface of the crinkled base, to a creamed mouthful of untampered delicacy.
Desert indian. Fuioare de fum ud sfârâie în tigaie și se ridică încet pentru a-ți mângâia conturul sânilor când gătești, amestecând mirodenii în morcovi, lapte și smântână, ingrediente fermecate pentru rețete de foame și pasiune. În timp ce topești zahăr și unt și presari cu grijă fulgi de migdale date pe răzătoare, alte fuioare de fum parfumați se infiltrează în mătasea cămășii, transparentă de căldură, pictându-ți cercul exterior al sfârcurilor și marginile întărite, gustând dulceața pielii, suprafața bazei lor încrețite și sorbind cu poftă din delicatesa neprihănită. A very special poem, Sudeep.
Thank you.
It's very sensual.
Yes, yes. It has to be.
It has to be.
Eating food is a very sensual act.
Yes. We have in Romanian an expression called mâncauar mama, mâncauar tata, sau uh, it's an expression that parents give to their children. I want to eat you. In uh, in in a sort of speaking, in a way, in a manner of speaking, because the the child is very a very pleasant person.
Yes.
But that expression, I believe, that came from the time when from cannibalistic times. But time had put the pressure on this image and transformed it.
Yes.
This is my
I,
theory, of course.
yeah, and of course, when a parent is telling the child, "I want to eat you," it's fine. But when an adult tells another adult, "I want to eat you,"
It's not fine.
well, it can be fine if
Can be fine.
can be fine if both
Can
people
be
agree.
erotic. It can be erotic.
Yes, yes.
Sudeep, tell us the most important characteristic of the Indian literary life. Um, uh, from
Impossible to answer
social,
that question. Sorry?
from the social and cultural points of view, on a scale from 1 to 10, what is the influence of Great Britain on Indian contemporary culture and society?
When you're talking about contemporary culture and society, I think Great Britain had a big influence when they were ruling India, you know. So the generation that came after that and so on, of course, there was a big influence, you know,
The influence
lot
is a
of
strong one now.
was a strong one. It was a strong one then, but
Was and
now it is not anymore.
not
Now I somehow, for some reason, you know, the younger generations speak more like Americans. So the American English and the American television and media and films and music is somehow influencing the young generation now, not the British influence. But maybe during my parents' time, the influence of British was a lot. And also when I was young, the English we learned was British English, which is obviously what I write in. I don't write in British English, but I certainly don't write in American English. I write in Indian English, which is closer to British English as far as I'm concerned, but certainly not American English. So depending on the time in history, it was a big influence, but now not at all, not at all. It's like one more country which is producing, you know, work. But just post-independence, maybe 10, 15 years after independence in 1947, yeah, at the time that time was a big influence, surely. But that's a long time ago too.
but
We have been independent. We have been independent for 75 years. So for the last 60 years.
but I
Uh,
think it's not. I might be wrong. That influence from 50 years ago is
75 years ago.
transformed. Is transformed now in another influence. Yes or no? But
Yeah, I mean
influence too.
everything transforms, you see. Everything transforms. So it did have an effect on language and even otherwise, historically and socially and so on, of course. But that's, I think, long way in the past, really. You know, we've been independent for 75 years already. So, you know, um, as I said, language-wise, Americans in terms of speaking English, that's the trend. People who speak English now want to imitate American English, which to me, I mean, it's part of time, isn't it? I mean, it's okay, But I find the English as it's spoken in the true English fashion. I'm not saying Queen's English necessarily. There's something very beautiful and pure about that English, which I like a lot. Everything else is a variation of that, including Indian English, including American English, including Australian English, including Caribbean English. And each one has its own music.
Yes.
Like, when people from the Caribbean speak English, it's wonderful because it's a mix of reggae and French and patois. Yo, man, it's like, it's wonderful because that English can only be spoken by them. Just like Australians speak English in a very different way. So I think in a kind of larger sense, it's only a good thing.
Should you tell me to make a change in our discussion? Are you a religious man?
I'm not a religious man, but I do believe in faith.
In faith in what? Faith in
Faith.
what?
Faith, faith. Faith in a larger force. We as human beings are very, very small in the larger scheme of things. A lot of the concepts, a lot of the things that rule our life are beyond our control. It's being mapped by much, much larger forces. Now, whether someone calls it a god, gives it a particular name, or puts a particular religion, or someone calls it science, or someone calls it something else, it's a different thing. So I'm not religious, bound by one religion, because I grew up in a very multi-faith India, very secular India. For instance, to give you an example, I went to a Christian missionary school. So I would start, when I would go to school, start the day with the Lord's Prayer, Our Father in heaven, holy be thy name. I step out of the school on the streets, I'm speaking Hindi. People are speaking in a different tongue. I come back home, I'm speaking in Bengali. And often, as I was saying earlier, we are mixing all these languages and speaking like 3 different languages in one sentence. My mother, my parents, of course, were born Hindu. So I remember my mother had a prayer room with all the gods and goddesses, primarily Hindu gods and goddesses. But she also had the crucifix. She also had the Quran. And from the very early on, I was told that it doesn't matter who you worship, it's ultimately the same God with a different name. All religions, the good part of religions, what religion used to be, religion is a philosophy, not the way religion is used. So at a philosophical level, it only tells you about what is the basic thing. To be a good human being is the message. To be kind to others is the message. So all religions say the same thing. So I'm not religious in terms of following one religion, but if I'm religious in terms of following all religions. But that makes it complicated. So therefore, I'm not religious, but I do have faith in a larger force.
And do you think this fact is important for your literature? Do you sense that?
Oh, totally. It's not only important for my own literature, but it's important for my personality. The way I grew up in a very, very broad-minded space. We would go to the Christian ceremonies when our Christian friends were celebrating it. And why did we go as children? Because there's sweets, there's new clothes. In the Muslim ceremony, we would go to the mosque and enjoy it ourselves. And so it was very mixed, and they would come for our ceremony. So it was truly secular in a real kind of way and accepting of each other. So I grew up in that space. And now I feel in the present world, it's become so much more narrow. So it's a disturbing thing to see how from a broad accepting space, countries and politics have become so much narrow and, non-human, I think. Look at what's happening all around the world. All the wars that are being fought for what? People are being shot every day. Gaza still goes on every day. Hundreds and hundreds of people are being killed. Um, and not to forget the other wars. You know, it all depends on what is being shown on television. The Syrian war still carries on. There's stuff going on in Lebanon. There's things going on in Ukraine. So all these things are happening at the same time. Okay, the focus is now on one part of the world. Um, I don't know. I mean, you know, that's why I feel, okay, I am religious. My religion is poetry. That's my religion.
Perfect, perfect. Sudeep, you have made short films and documentaries, and you wrote theater too. Tell us something more about you as a filmmaker, as a playwright, and about your future plans if you have.
Future plans if I have. I don't know what's in the future. After this program, I shut the laptop and I may not wake up again. But I might live for a long, long time.
Yes.
My plans are very organic, you know. I let the wind and the weather and the cycle of the day influence me. I don't want to conquer them. There is only that much time in the given day. I don't want to be ahead of time because one has to respect nature around us. That's only if we respect nature around us that the nature can be preserved. Why do you think there's so much? The climate change is completely man-made, human-made. A lot of the problems that are happening in the world is actually made because of we have no respect for the environment and people often. My future plan is to finish the 3 or 4 books I'm writing at the moment. Hopefully, it'll be a better book than the last one. That's my hope. There are interesting books. The first poem I read out, which is disembodied, is from Anthropocene, which I showed you, which is on climate change and was written during the pandemic. And then earlier last year, I had a lovely 3-month fellowship in South Africa in a place called the Nyrox Foundation. The Nyrox
I've seen
Foundation,
pictures.
I know, it's just stunning. I mean, you know, I didn't want to leave, but I had to leave. I wanted to live there. But, you know, it's 100 hectares of land and only 5% of it is, you know, for the residency. The rest is wild, you know, rivers and animals and bird life. So every day in my morning and evening walks, I'm actually walking through wild land. Of course, the big five were not there. It was safe. But giraffes and zebras and gazelles and all. And I learned, in a sense, how to be around animals because we as human beings have lost it, lost the art of respecting because it's their land. We are the ones who were trying to conquer that land and remove those people. So it was very interesting. Like the local warden would tell me, so if the animal's there, you should do this and this. These are the signs. Always make sure that they get respect. And, you know, once they understand that in a human being, it's amazing how close you can get to the animals, wild animals. Also, that place, the Nyrox Foundation, is a very, very particular, very special place because it's called the cradle of humankind. It's the place in that whole area where the first human fossils were found. So we are going back all those millions of years, you know. So when I'm walking on these wild land, I'm walking on stones and bones of so many years ago. So how can you not be influenced by ecology and all that? And of course, the place is beautiful too. I mean, you can see millions of stars at night. I don't see it in Delhi at all because there's so much pollution. In cities, there's so much light pollution. Even if there's no other pollution, you'd hardly see stars. You have to go really out in nature to see the stars. So I ended up writing this book called Red, which I realized was a sequel to Anthropocene because I was still dealing with rocks and fossil and climate and ecology. I was completely in a trance. I wrote this book in 2 months. 2 months I wrote this big book. Anyway, so a limited edition of that was published in there, and hopefully the larger world edition will come out this year. And then I realized that, listen, some of the things I was writing in South Africa, of course, had to do with South Africa, but the echoes are still from India because I'm an Indian, Deep down, I'm also viewing a lot of things from an Indian sensibility. So I said, since I've written about these ancient rocks and bones, there are equally ancient rocks and bones in my country. So I got fascinated with rocks and fossils. So I traced the whole Deccan Plateau belt from, say, Hyderabad, the rocks there, all the way down to Hampi, and photographed these rocks. And the third book in the trilogy will be called Rock. So this is how I write. This is how I live my life. I just let everything else influence me, and I submit, and then you just float along with it. So that's the immediate project. There's also another project which the book is written. It's just not published. Lots of it has been published in various earlier books, called The Whispering Anklet. The anklet the dancers wear on their ankles, Indian classical dance. So I love classical music and dance. So The Whispering Anklet is basically a response, 35, 40 years of my obsession with classical music and dance. But to go back to your earlier part of your question about film and filmmaking, when I was at Columbia University, I was studying journalism, but my thesis was a documentary film. So I was trained in documentary films, and the films, I would actually shoot them myself. I was both the director and the cinematographer, partly because of my interest in photography, and photography is a big part two of my life even now. I kept the two sides, the photography and poetry, very separate because in my early days, I didn't want the books to have any of my photographs because, people will say that I'm illustrating the poem with a photograph. That's not. Now, starting with Anthropocene, I have some photographs in my book, and the next two books will have a lot more photography. Having said that, the photographs are not illustrating the poems, and the poems are not illustrating the pictures. They work as antithetical objects, art objects, in dialogue with each other. So because of my interest in photography, of course, I got interested in shooting the films. So I made about, 8 documentary films. I enjoyed that space very, very much. But I was always frustrated because I was missing writing poetry because there was no time. And with film, as you know, you're dependent on a big team. You're dependent on your crew, your actors, the sound recorders, the lighting person, the set design. Any one aspect can go wrong, it ruins the film. As an individual artist, you have very little control over a project like film. So I enjoyed it, but I said, I need to go back to poetry. But I did that for a long time, but not anymore. Now, what has happened is some of my poems have been used by filmmakers and others, and they've been made into short films, poetry films. A poetry film is a subgenre, as you know, so a lot of them are available on YouTube, and it's all on my channel. But these are other people taking my poems and making them into little films. Just like I have done collaboration with musicians. There have been bands who have taken my poems and made songs out of them. Because for me, art is a very holistic thing. Poetry is what I do, and it's my passion, and it's my religion, since you asked me. But it is possible for me to be a poet because I'm surrounded by dancers, musicians, artists. They enrich my life. It's a part of a holistic world. So yes, I don't make films anymore, but I watch a lot, and my work is used in films.
I want to be proud of my culture in cinema, and I want to say to you that I know an Indian director, Satyajit Ray.
That's right. Satyajit Ray was a Bengali, in fact, like me. But he's one of the best known
Yes.
directors of the time. In fact, he won the Lifetime Achievement Oscar before he died. But yes, Satyajit Ray was very
Very good
influential.
director.
Yes. But there are many. I mean, the Indian film industry can be split into two parts. One is the popular films, and
Bollywood.
one is Bollywood, which is a lot of fun. It depends on my mood. So I don't have any like high art and low art. For me, everything is art. It just depends on my mood. It's like pop music and classical music. Both are valid, you see. I am particularly like jazz. I mean, at the Lit Fest, I remember there was a couple of shows we went to for these jazz concerts. It was fantastic, and so yeah. So that's the film side of it. But you know what? The film aspect, the visual aspect, has influenced my poetry because often I see from a lens point of view, whether it's 4:3 the frame or 16:9, like that, what is in the frame. But what is outside the frame is equally important. That's the power of poetry. Poetry allows you to do all sorts of things which other genres doesn't, because poetry also includes in its space not just the voice,
It's
but
multidimensional.
silence. So much of the poetry is understood in silence, not when it's because we read in silence and we take
Yes.
back the echoes of a silence. And also on the page, when you see my poems, the white spaces on the page are equally important as the inked part of the page, because the white space is like an antithesis to the black ink letters.
I've learned that from the actors, from how they are read poetry. Sudeep, let's start the last session of reading. And you've told me that you will read 4 or 5 poems that are
Well,
not
depends on how much time you have. Yeah, I can read a few
four,
poems.
four,
Four?
4 or 5. Yes,
Yeah. Okay.
yes,
Okay.
please.
So this particular poem is called Offering. I thought it was there in the book, but it's not. I thought there was a Romanian translation, but I think this poem is being translated by Magda Carnecci. When the book came out in Timisoara, we had a lovely launch at the Museum of Literature in Bucharest, which Magda was interviewing me and reading in Romanian. I think she translated. Uh, and I wrote some new poems while I was in your country. Those I should send. Offering. And it's an offering to you as a friend. It's an offering to
Thank you.
all my friends in Romania, and it's for everybody. Because at the end of the day, poetry doesn't matter, film doesn't matter, nothing matters, but human relationships is what matters. Friendship is what matters. So it's dedicated to all of you guys.
Thank you.
Offering. The kindness of libation, lyric, and blood. The endless notes left for me, little secrets, graces, trills recorded on blue and purple parchment to be lived, tasted, devoured. Only the essence remains, its stickiness, its juice, its memory. Seamless juxtaposition, the brute and the passion, dry of the bone and wet of the sea, coarseness of the page and smooth of the nib's iridium. I try and trace a line, a very long line. The ink blots as the line's linear edge dissolves and frays, like capillary threads gone mad, twirling in the deep heat of the tropics. Threads unraveling, each sinew tense with the want of moisture and the other's flesh. There are no endings here. only beginnings. Precious incipients, translucent drops of sweat perch precariously on her collarbone, waiting to slide, roll unannounced into the gullies that yearn to soak in the rain. Heartbeats shift the shape of globules as they alter their balance and color, changing their very point of gravity, constantly deceiving the other. I stand wanting more of the bone's dry edge, the infinite blur of desire, the dream, the wet, the salt, the ink, and the underside of her skin.
I found the poems.
You
I
found
found
the
them.
poem.
Yes, yes,
It's in the book.
yes.
Well,
I will read them.
yeah.
Ofrandă. Bunătatea libației, poezie și sânge, notele ei nesfârșite lăsate pentru mine, mici secrete drăgălășenii, triluri înregistrate pe pergament albastru și violet pentru a fi atinse cu buzele, gustate, devorate, numai esența rămâne. Stăruința ei, sucul ei, amintirea ei, juxtapunere fără cusătură, bruta și pasiunea, oul secat și apa mării, asprimea paginii și finețea peniței de iridiu. Încerc să trag o linie foarte lungă, fac pete de cerneală când marginea liniară a acestei linii se dizolvă și se zdrențuiește, ca firele capilare înnebunite, rotindu-se în arșița grea a tropicelor, fire descălcindu-se, fiecare tendon încordat din lipsă de umezeală și carnea celuilalt. Nu există finaluri aici, doar începuturi. Incipiență prețioasă, stropi de sudoare translucizi, cocoțați precar pe clavicula ei, așteptând să alunece, să se rostogolească neanunțat în rigole, când tânjesc să se îmbibe de ploaie. Bătaia inimii schimbă forma globulelor în timp ce ele își modifică echilibrul și culoarea, deplasându-și chiar și centrul de greutate, înșelându-l constant pe celălalt, vreau mai mult din marginea seacă a osului, pâclă infinită a dorinței, visul, apa, sarea, cerneala și partea nevăzută a pielii ei. Let's hear the next one.
The next one is called Gaza. And this poem, Gaza, was not written now, during the current war. This was written when the last time the attacks happened. But nothing has changed. It's just become worse. Gaza. Soaked in blood, children, their heads blown out, even before they're formed. Gauze, more gauze, interminable lengths, not long enough to soak all the blood in Gaza. A river of blood flowing, flooding the desert sands with incarnadine hate. An endless lava stream on a parched, orphaned land, bombed every 5 minutes to strip Gaza of whatever is left of the Gaza Strip. Tiny lives snuffed out, faces defaced, eyes vacant, the new Holocaust continues unabated. The world weeps red, mourning, an unceasing blood song.
I will read the translation.
Oh, you have the translation?
Yes, all of the poems.
Fantastic.
Yes, I found them. Înnecați în sânge, copii, capetele lor explodate chiar înainte de a se forma. Bandaj, bandaj, mai mult bandaj, role interminabile, dar nu destul de lungi ca să absoarbă tot sângele din Gaza. Un râu de sânge curgând, inundând nisipul deșertului cu ură purpurie. Un flux de lavă nesfârșit pe un teren lăsat orfan de uscăciune, bombardat tot la 5 minute pentru a lăsa Gaza și fără ceea ce a mai rămas din fâșia Gaza. Viețișoare sfărâmate, fețe fără chip, orbite goale, un nou holocaust continuă, nestăvilit. Lumea plânge roșu, doliu, cântec de sânge necontenit. Poem scris în 2014.
Hmm. And maybe the last poem called Mother, Ma. Yeah, it's an old poem. I wrote it in 2013, I think.
13, yes.
Yes. And it's obviously after my mother died, and it's dedicated to my father. Both are no more right now. But, part of it was to do with the fact that we have a lot of rituals. You're talking about religion. Every religion has lots of rituals. And in the Hindu ritual, after a person dies, there are lots of things that have to happen. And if I'm the eldest child, I'm supposed to be doing many of the things. You have to feed the community, you have to do this, that. So, for a whole month, I couldn't even grieve about my mother's death because I had so many public things to do around this. Also, the other irony is that the way the governments work, the way bureaucracy works, is until I had the official death certificate from the municipality, my mother was not dead, even though she had died. And I had to have 3 copies signed. So it talks about these strange things that society does, where the personal is not allowed to have a personal time with even the person who's died. Ma, mother. As if in a dream you disappeared unannounced, untimely and unprepared. The handwritten diary you left behind weepingly revealed your sordid, searing pain. Grief struck, I run around the city's municipal offices, rummaging through bureaucratic files, seeking your death certificate for validation, as if losing you wasn't loss enough.
Poem care se numește Mama. Mama. Pentru baba. Ca într-un vis, ai dispărut pe neașteptate, prea devreme și nepregătită. Jurnalul scris de mână pe care l-ai lăsat în urmă ți-a dezvăluit suferința sordidă, mistuitoare. Copleșit de durere, alerg de la o instituție municipală la alta, scotocind prin dosarele birocrației, căutându-ți certificatul de deces pentru validare, de parcă pierderea ta n-ar fi fost de ajuns. Sudeep, thank you very much. It was a real
My
pleasure
pleasure.
for me. The time had another dimension with you.
Well, it's wonderful to see you and talk poetry, in a concentrated manner. Yeah, we've been.
Yes. And I want to see each other again, hopefully soon.
Hopefully,
Who knows?
hopefully, hopefully, maybe at the museum where you work. That would
Yes,
be wonderful
yes,
to come and do some more translations. I can come and even do translations workshop and master classes of
yes,
writing.
yes.
Many possibilities, but yeah,
Make
it'd be happy to see you.
an appointment with children from school.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
with
Yes,
the poems.
absolutely. But I must also again thank Antusa Ionescu for translating all these poems so that it's reaching the Romanian audience because of the existence of the translations, and to your wonderful reading of the poems.
Thank
I've
you.
heard her read, and now I hear you read. I've heard a few other people read these poems, and it's wonderful how they come alive in a different way. The same poem comes alive in a different way. But it's really wonderful because I have very fond memories of your country, Timișoara, of course, in particular because I spent so much time, but many other places, Bucharest and so on. And so to all you guys in Romania, lots of love.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Sudeep. And keep in touch.
Indeed, of course.